Okay, guys, please feel free to ask me any questions as we go along. This is a national support session, so it's here just to support you in the submission of your assignment that's due in a week's time. So please, as always, remember to get your assignment in before the due time, because I'm not allowed to mark it if it's late, and late is 1 minute past 9 or 2 minutes past 9. So please, it's really important you watch the time when you submit, as usual. So the assignment itself is out of 100 marks. So please remember, no copying from original sources. Even if it's referenced correctly, it can't be word for word unless you've put it in a direct quote. And remember that no more than 10% of your assignment can be in those direct quotations. And please remember, save a copy when you submit it, just in case there's a problem. And also just take a screenshot of anything that indicates your submission. Things can go wrong, as we know, and so rather err on the side of caution and make sure that you've got a copy of your assignment and you've got a copy of your submission. And if you have any problems submitting, technical problems or any kind of problems, please don't message me. Make sure that you email or log a query with VC Assist so that they can support you, because that's the very first point of call you must make. After that, you can just let me know you've got a problem and I can see what I can do from my side, but that will be your first point of call. Make sure you do all your referencing correctly using APA 7th edition. There's quite a few bits of referencing that are needed in this assignment, so please make sure that you are fully comprehensive on the style of APA 7th edition referencing. Okay, there are guides to help you with that. So because there's a bit of referencing involved in this assignment, please just make sure that you read the referencing rubric and understand it, because we've done one assignment, so now we're going to be quite strict with this assignment. So make sure that your referencing style is consistent, that you've used the same format. Make sure that your referencing is correct throughout. So technical correctness of your referencing, and make sure, because a lot of people are doing this, is that if you've got a reference list, whatever is in your reference list must be cited in the text, and whatever is cited in the text must be in your reference list. So it's called congruence. Okay, so you can't just give me a reference list and there's no evidence of that text being used in your actual submission. So for every reference, you must have an in-text citation and vice versa. Okay, and if you don't follow the guidelines, I'm forced to deduct 5% for minor errors and 10% for major errors. So please just double check all your referencing before you submit it. Okay, we'll touch on referencing a little bit at the end, just to give you some extra guidance on that. So basically, this assignment focuses only on learning Unit 3 in your learning materials, which is Chapter 3 in your textbook. So it's quite nice that it doesn't cover more than that. And basically, the assignment is going to cover the things that are listed there. So it's going to cover how signals are sent and received in the brain. It's going to cover that you can differentiate. That means show the difference between the peripheral and the central nervous system. It's going to make sure you can list and describe the different brain scanning techniques in order to understand brain functioning, and that you can explain various brain imaging procedures that will assist in understanding abnormalities in the brain. So those are the different focus areas of the assignment, and there is a rubric at the end of your question paper, which I will show you during the course of this NSS, how it's applied to each question. So you've got everything you need to answer the question to get an excellent mark. Okay. So let's have a look at the first question, question 1, and it gives you a little case study there. And it says you order a burger from a fast food restaurant close to your home. As you're about to eat the burger, you find a fly baked into the bun. You immediately spit out the food that's in your mouth. You're confused and angered at the same time as you were hungry and looked forward to it. You email the restaurant to report this, and all they could say was that the fly could not have come from the restaurant, as they make sure all the food quality is checked before it leaves the restaurant. At this very moment, many things are going through your mind. Many complex processes are taking place beyond your level of conscious awareness to understand what has just occurred. Your brain is interpreting characters to understand what's just occurred. As you reply back to what the manager had told you, your brain is sending signals to the muscles in your fingers, so each finger strikes the right spot based on the words you have decided to type. So that's the example it gives you in order to answer the question. So, based on the case scenario above, about the hamburger and the fly, explain what is occurring in the brain when signals are sent and received. So I've put a star there so you can note it's asking you to explain what's happening in the brain. It's not asking you to explain how visual images are processed through your eyes. It's actually asking you to think about the brain and what happens in the brain when signaling takes place, when signals specifically are sent and received. So the first part of the rubric says that you can explain how signals are sent and received, and clear processes must be noted. So that will be on the processes of neural signaling in the brain that take place. What you have to do is you have to make a connection between the theory that you're giving in the first part to the content of the case scenario. And that's half the marks, is that you can't just outline the process, you have to link the process back to the case scenario. So you have to mention various pieces of evidence in the case study that apply to what you're saying. So as much as you know the theory, it's about application to the case, and that's where you get half your marks from. But remember that the actual process that you're needed to discuss is the actual is the signaling in the brain when signals are sent and received. So understand that and then look at it and say, okay, how can I apply this theory to the actual incident at hand of the fly in the burger? All right. So it's not about how images come through the eye and the retina, how sensation. It's not about perception. It's about the actual biology in the brain of how signals are sent and how they are received, and how that can be linked to what's in the case study. Okay, I hope that's clear. Any questions on that particular question number 1? All right. Question number 2 is, your friend who is studying law does not understand the difference between the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. How would you go about providing a detailed explanation to them so they might have a better understanding? So the rubric says to us that you can differentiate between the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. That's the theory that it's asking you to give, is the differentiation between the peripheral and the central nervous system. But it does say clear examples to be provided in order to understand how the nervous system affects bodily functions. So remember that the question is saying to you, your friend is a lawyer, so they are a lay person. So it is, you can give them a lot of technical detail, but unless you can link it to how the nervous system affects bodily functions in each of the instances, you won't be getting the excellent marks. So as much as you write the theory of what happens, make sure that in each instance and for each part of the nervous system, you have looked at how the nervous system affects bodily functions. Okay, remember who you're explaining it to, and make sure that you can give examples of how those different components of the system influence bodily functions. Okay, the third question says to you, or 1.3, says to you in essay format, and we'll come back to that shortly. Discuss the different brain scanning techniques used in practice to understand brain functioning. You must make use of 2 sources in addition to your prescribed textbook. So you are welcome to use your textbook as a source, but in addition to that, you have to have found 2 sources that you can use in your essay. So the way the rubric asks us to look at this, and remember this is talking about an essay. So we're going to have to use essay format, and I think I elaborate on that in the next slide. But what we will be looking for is you've got a clear introduction of what brain scanning techniques are. You've got an accurate and in-depth discussion on at least 2 brain scanning techniques with clear examples, that you have used 2 credible sources in addition to the use of the textbook, and you've got a clear conclusion and paragraphs for ease of reading. 1 to 2 pages in length is satisfactory. So sometimes remember, it's not always about the quantity of what you write, it's about the quality of what you write. So you don't have to give me all the brain scanning techniques, rather give me at least 2 that you know that you've done well and that you've used additional referencing for. Okay, so it's essay format, which means it's got to have that introduction, it's got to have that conclusion, and it's got to have at least two examples of brain scanning techniques, and that you've done additional research, and it's got to be credible research. So what you need to do is you need to find what is considered credible research. Okay, so it needs to be something that is of value to the discipline. It is written by someone who's credible. It's not from some kind of fly-by-night magazine that you need to choose a website or an article or a book that is academically sound in this particular field. All right. So when we look at our essay formats, the introduction, it says to us, that's where you introduce brain scanning. So you can say something like, and please remember this is not fill in the missing words, but it's just giving you a little bit of guidance for writing your essay. So your introduction will have something like brain scanning is, and techniques that will be discussed in the essay that follows are. Okay, so a clear introduction that introduces the concept and says what you will be discussing. And then you break your essay structure down into paragraphs. So the first paragraph is, if you're on your first brain scanning technique, is an accurate and in-depth discussion on technique 1 with a suitable source and reference included. Your next paragraph would be on a second technique, again with a suitable source and reference included. If you choose to do a third one, you're welcome. It carries on like that. And in your conclusion, must be substantial, and in your conclusion you don't introduce any new elements. But what you're going to do in your conclusion is say the final thoughts, or it will be your final thoughts, and you pick 1 or 2 main points from your essay, and you say something like, from the points made in this essay, it can be seen that, and give it a sufficient conclusion. So it's really important that you have that essay format correct. That will be part of your marking, and that you're writing in a suitable academic style, that you've done the relevant research, you've given a suitable source, and you've referenced it correctly. And at the end of the assignment, you put your reference list. And always remember that in an assignment, your reference list comes at the end of your assignment, not at the end of the question. And you might think that I shouldn't, that's a silly thing to do. And people, but people do. They put their references at the end of the question. So I just want to make sure you all know that from all your answers, your reference list for everything goes right at the end. And the very first thing I do is when I'm reading your question and I see an in-text citation, I go down and check it's in the reference. And if I see a reference, I go and I check that it's actually in the question itself. So that's the first thing I check, is that everything is congruent and aligns correctly. So there's a few pages in your textbook that speaks about brain scanning. You need to choose at least 2 of those, elaborate on them with research to substantiate them from a suitable source. Okay, not a difficult question. It's quite straightforward. It's quite technical in terms of the knowledge, and it's quite technical in terms of the application, but it's not difficult. And the final question, 1.4, is, now this is brain imaging. So it says choose any 2 brain imaging procedures used in practice and create a side-by-side comparison in table format, detailing how each understand various abnormalities in the brain. So then it says discuss any similarities or differences and provide clear examples where necessary. Okay, and we've done a side-by-side comparison before. I've put an image there at the bottom. So on the left, you'll have brain imaging procedure 1, and on the right, you'll have brain imaging procedure 2. You'll discuss them. You'll show that you've done some research for them, because it says in the rubric that we need to be insightful with further research. You'll look at if there are any similarities and any differences, and you give an example. So the rubric says that you can explain any 2 brain imaging procedures used to understand abnormalities. So remember to look at the abnormalities and which brain imaging procedure is looks at the relevant abnormality. There must be insightful and in-depth information to show that further research has been conducted into these and not just a repetition of the textbook. So again, this question is also asking you to do research. Is it fine? Brain imaging is a type of brain scanning, okay? But within brain imaging itself, there are different procedures. So brain imaging may appear twice in the question before this, but this question is asking you to look specifically at the procedures within brain imaging. So if you discuss brain imaging in the previous question, it's fine, but what you're going to do with this is go into it in more detail for 2 different procedures, if that makes sense, without giving too much information to you. So brain imaging is a type of brain scanning, but now this is asking you specifically on brain imaging. So when you do the table, please remember that don't write in bullet points. Just because it's a table, it does not mean write in bullet points. Never write in bullet points in academic writing. Again, put your reference at the end of the assignment, not at the end of the table, because I get people who put their references at the end of the table, or just put one in-text citation after the table, below the table. Your in-text citation must be within the table, within your writing. Okay, and just make your table wide so that the writing's all not squashed up, if that makes sense, because presentation is important when we write these assignments. So even though it's a table, make it as wide as your page so that each column has got a decent width to write in, because that also makes it easier to read. So it's you write academically, but the space you're writing in is narrower than it would be if it was on a full page, if you understand what I'm saying. So in each instance, I'm going to look to see that you've identified a correct brain imaging procedure, that you've been able to discuss it, that you've been able to do research on it, that you have identified any similarities or differences between the 2 approaches, and they all are quite different. So it might not be exact, it might be quite a general difference or similarity, and that you also can give an example of the abnormality. Okay, so that's how I look at it. So if we've got 2 procedures, it's basically, it would be 10 marks for each one. All right, and higher marks exceeding the required standard. So it's, again, quite as straightforward, but it's asking you to do additional research, and make sure you're doing additional research on the right topic. Okay, so just to note, again, please, this is requires you to do research, so please make sure your referencing is correct. The Purdue Online Writing Lab is a wonderful resource. I've put an example there because most people end up with a web page or a piece of online content, and there's an example from the from the website onto how to reference online content. So again, we always try to find the author of the online content, last name and initials. We put the year, month, and the date. We put the title of the page, and then we put the site. Okay, the title of the page is in italics, and we put the URL. Just remember, APA 7th edition doesn't need a retrieval date. Okay, unless it's from a web page that's always updated, like Wikipedia can be updated all of the time. So you don't need a retrieval date, but you must get your referencing correct and the website correct. If the online content is from an organization, so for example, it says the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, so it doesn't have an author, then you use the name of the group who has published, the year, month, and date, the title of the page, the site name, and the URL. Okay, if there's no date, if you can't find a date, then you put ND in brackets. So in your in-text citation, you need to make sure you put the author's name only, unless there is no author, in which case you would put the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and 2019 in brackets. Okay, that's how your in-text citation works. So as I said, it's a wonderful resource, and before you type in your references, make sure you've got them correct, and you can check them against these examples that are there for you. Another point to note, again, is just paraphrasing and tips on paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is basically putting someone else's ideas into your own words and thoughts without changing the original meaning. Here are some best practice. And a lot of this work in this assignment is about paraphrasing. So how do I learn to paraphrase? If you're thoroughly reading and researching articles or book chapters, you'll start to take notes in your own words. And that's what paraphrasing is. These notes are the beginning of paraphrased information. So the best way to paraphrase is to read the original information, put it away, and then write it in your own words. That's how you sort of get the hang of paraphrasing. It's better to paraphrase than use too many direct quotes. And as we know, we can't have more than 10% of our paper in direct quotes. When you start to paraphrase, cite your source. Make sure that the language is not too close to the original, so you're not committing plagiarism. And it's quite hard when it's technical writing, and obviously there's some leniency in that, especially when it comes to this kind of work around brain scanning and brain imaging. But if you've shown that you've made an attempt to get it all into your own words, it's not like you have to use a thesaurus to work out what another way of saying brain scanning is. I mean, it's a known application, so you're good using those kinds of words, but just make an effort to show that you're not plagiarizing it. And so, yeah, the rest is just the best time direct quotes is when you need to give an exact definition or provide specific evidence, or you need to use the original writer's terminology. The best practice is per paragraph. On your first paraphrase of a source, cite it. There's no need to add another in-text citation until you use a different source or until you use a direct quote. But when I say that, what I mean is somebody will write an entire essay and put the textbook citing at the end of it, okay, which doesn't really give sufficient in-text citation for the work you're doing. So if you need to break up your essay into paragraphs, put your citation at the beginning, and then you can put it again later on if you're using it again, or however it works. But just don't write long pages and just put in one in-text citation at the end of it. So I'll show you now. When should you add in-text citations? The paragraph rules of thumb: cite after the first paraphrase, continue writing, add a new cite for a new source or a direct quote. So several rules of thumb. Think of your paper broken up into paragraphs. When you start a paragraph the first time, you add a sentence that's been paraphrased. That's when you add it into the in-text citation. And again, with a new source, you do your next in-text citation, or a direct quote, you put your next citation. Okay, don't need to do it after every sentence of your paragraph, but if you've got long essays and you only give me one in-text citation, it's not really going to be sufficient. So in-text citation styles. So where there's one author, the example is Forbes 2020, and a way to do it in a narrative citation is to say Forbes 2020 stated that. If there's two authors, Bennett and Miller 2019, Bennett and Miller 2019 concluded that. So you can use it in a narrative way, or you can use it in that parenthetical citation. But that is how you do your in-text citation. As you can see, three authors, it becomes et al. So if it's Jones, Bennett, and Miller, you'll just say Jones et al. And if it's a group or an organization, like we said with the SPCA, East Carolina University 2020. So there's two examples there. An example with one author, a parenthetical citation says, following the guidelines will help you cultivate your own unique academic voice as an expert in your field. The narrative citation, Forbes 2020 shared that by following American Psychological APA guidelines, students would learn to find their voice. So you can see the two different styles of citation. So please just make sure you get your in-text citations correct. With the author, the year, all it needs is the surname. It doesn't need initials. Just the author and the year, and if it's more than three authors, it's et al, and if it's an organization, it's the organization name. So I hope that gives you some guidelines. It's not a difficult paper in terms of content, but it's just difficult in terms of your application. So I don't know if anyone's got any questions. Nikki, in APA, you don't need to cite all of them in your first citation. It's just you can do Jones et al. In your first citation. You don't need to put all of them for APA. I hope that answers your question. All right, so I hope you've got it. If you've got any questions, you're welcome to send me an email and let me know. If I can help you with anything, if you want me to check a source for you to make sure it's a credible source, if you've got any problems with your referencing, but just note that in those rubrics, we will be looking at referencing and the research that you've done to answer the questions. All right, does anyone else have any questions? All right, don't think there's anything else I need to tell you. I think that's straightforward. The brain scanning is straightforward. The essay style, noting that the marks are allocated not just to the content, but also to your essay style and your research. The central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, make sure you give me clear examples linked to bodily functions. That will give you a really good mark if you can do that in each instance. And yeah, the signaling being sent and received, and make sure that you can use the case study to support the theory. Yeah, I think it's all straightforward. Guys, I hope that helps. It's quite an arduous assignment, but yeah, it's not too challenging if you can do your research to support your work. All right, are we all good? Okay, can I say good night? Turn off the recording. I'm going to turn off the recording.